Welcome back to the video lecture series for Introduction to the Art of Programming using Scala. In this video we're going to talk about the java.util.scanner class. We've been looking at how we can read files using scala.io.source, but this isn't the only way that's available for you to read files in Scala. You can also take advantage of the fact that you have access to the full Java libraries. Kind of the easiest way to read text files in Java is using a scanner. Now, there are some benefits and some pitfalls to using scanner as opposed to using java.io.source. And the biggest pitfall is the fact that a scanner is not part of the Scala collections library. So the ability to do things like mapping and filtering and all those things, those aren't going to happen implicitly for you when you use a scanner the way that they do when you use a source. However, the scanner is set up a little bit better for reading in things like individual numbers. So let's look at an example of this. First, let's call this. The example I'm going to use is to read in a matrix. So I'll make a file called matrix scanner, and so that I don't have to type in the full name, I'm going to import java.util.scanner. I'm actually going to have to type in something else, import something else as well, and that is a java.io.file. So when I make a new scanner, so I'll call my scanner SC, you can attach scanners to multiple things. You can actually make it so your scanner reads in a string if you want. But I want it to read in from a file. And so if I were to just pass a file name, it actually doesn't think that that's a file that I want. It thinks that I want to parse that string. So I need to create a new one of these file objects. We'll learn more about file objects later on. They're remarkably helpful. They have a whole bunch of helpful methods in them. They're covered in part 2 of the book. And I called my file matrix2.txt. Okay. And we can compare this to our first matrix. So in a previous video, we had this 3x3 matrix, and it was a bunch of comma-separated values. For matrix 2, I've used a slightly different format, and this isn't an uncommon format to use, where we start off with the number of rows and the number of columns, and then we have that many individual numbers on them. In this case I went with integers, but it doesn't really matter. Another thing that's interesting to note here is there is a blank line, and it turns out that the way that our code for reading the previous matrix was written, this blank line at the end of the file would have caused us problems, because we would have tried to split this on commas and then done a conversion to doubles on the pieces, and we would have only gotten one piece, and it would have been the empty string, and trying to convert that to a double would have caused us problems. And the scanner won't suffer from this, but it does need the additional information here that there are 3 rows and 3 columns. Just like with a scanner, because this is a file, if I'm going to open it, I want to make sure that I close it. And how do I get information from the scanner? Well, the scanner has a number of different methods in it that all start with next. So if you just call next, that gives you basically the next word. You can change the delimiter that's used. By default, it's white space. So by default, calling sc.next gives you just the next word that's in the file. So it reads until it hits white space, and then it stops. And then it will skip the white space, and if you call next again, it'll read until it hits white space, and that process gets repeated. But rows isn't just a string. I don't want a string here. I want it to be an int. So there's also a method called nextInt. If I wanted a whole line, there is a next line. And in fact, there is something interesting to note about that, and we can play with this in just a second. Lowercase n. So I'm going to call nextInt for the rows and columns. Now think about what I would have had to do here if this were a source. I would have had to, and in fact I can type in some code like this. I could have done something like array of rows comma calls equals, if I had it in an iterator for lines dot split on space dot map of underscore dot to double. And this would use a pattern match on the array to get back these things. And I have to admit, this code is not necessarily as readable as this. This just says, give me the next 2 ints. And the scanner, or the source, really doesn't have that type of functionality in it. So if you have a file format like this, the scanner truly can be a superior way of reading things in. Now, just to demonstrate something, sorry, not new line, sc.next line, and then let's print line of rows plus calls plus, and now I want to do something. I'm going to put a hyphen hyphen plus line plus hyphen hyphen. I want it to be very clear what the line is, because what I'm about to show you is a standard problem that you run into when you use scanner, and in particular when you start using next line and mixing it with other calls. So we called this matrix scanner. I'm assuming I've typed everything in correctly. 3, 3, that's fine. And oh my goodness, there are 4 hyphens in a row. Now, when you look at this file here, you'd think, oh, well, it should, next line, I read a 3, I read a 3, next line should give me that. I should have gotten 1, 0, 0 on a line. But that's not what happened. And the reason that's not what happened is because reading the 3 here didn't automatically advance to the next line. So when I call next line, it reads the emptiness after this 3, and it's literally just reading what's left of that line, which is a blank line. And so if you switch from next int or next double or whatever to next line, you have to be very careful to make sure that you're actually moving down. It's very common. Had I wanted this to behave properly, I would have done something like this, just to flush out that. So I would read a line and throw it away, just because it's all that it's reading is the stuff that's after that. Now in this particular situation, I don't have that problem. And in fact, I would argue that a lot of times if you have whole line data, maybe the source is a better way to go than the scanner. But now I have a number of rows and columns, and what I want to do is I want to read these into a two-dimensional array. How would we do that? Well, there are lots of ways we could do that, of course, but I think the easiest might actually just be to use array.fill. And I'm going to make a two-dimensional array, and I'm going to make it so that it has rows and columns as the 2 dimensions, and the reading function is actually, I'm going to use next double because this is a matrix, and even though all the numbers happen to be ints, it might be nice to show them this way. And so now I can show that that matrix is in there by doing matrix dot for each row I want, let's actually, yeah, can I do it this way? Print line underscore dot mk string of spaces. Let's see if that's happy with the underscore notation there. Yeah, I was afraid of that. This is a situation where I really need to go to the rocket notation for my anonymous function. And there we go. Okay, so I was able to read in this matrix, and we can see that it printed out, and array.fill gave me exactly what I wanted. And it, this was split on spaces, so next double read a 1 first, and then it read a 0, and then it read another 0, and then another 0, and then a 1, and another 0, etc. So this is how you can use a scanner. If you have files that do things like having multiple numbers on each line, and especially if you know how many numbers there are, or if you want to handle the reading so that some of them go into one collection and others go into another, a scanner can be very advantageous. It can actually be easier to use. You might also, it's not as useful, but it's worth pointing out. So when we've read an int, we've been using readInt. And readInt is fine, except have you ever had that problem where you have two ints on a line and you want to read both of them? Well, you can do readLine and then split it and then map it. But you can also use a scanner for this. And since I already have one scanner in here, I'll name this one keys. And I want to tell it to read from standard input. Now for this I have to refer to something in the Java libraries called system.in. But now I can do a equals keys dot next int, val b equals keys dot next double, print line a and b, now if I run this, it prints that out and it's waiting for me to type something in. I'm going to say 5 and 8.3 and it prints them back out to me. And so this is another one of these places where reading from a scanner, because I have multiple values, especially they're different types, being different types means that I can't use a simple split and map approach. I would have to split it and then treat the individual elements differently. So this is another one of those situations where using a scanner might make your life easier. Unfortunately, you can't really read half of a file with a scanner and half of a file with a source, so you kind of need to figure out which one fits your total application better. So that's it for this video. In the next one we're going to come back and we're going to look at how you can write things out to files using a print writer. So in some ways we can complete the loop so that we can have programs that read in data and write it out, and then you can run the program again and it will read in the data that was written out the last time.